At its core, Fracture to Flourish is a podcast about systems. Not systems as abstractions, but systems as they're actually experienced by human beings. Because systems don't merely shape outcomes, they shape identities. They shape what children believe about safety, about love, about permanence, about themselves. And nowhere is that more visible than in foster care. In Season 1 of Fracture to Flourish, we explored what happens when young people age out of foster care, when the support structures that many of us take for granted suddenly disappear. But underneath the statistics, underneath the policy conversations, there was another story emerging, a quieter one, about what instability actually does to a child over time, how chaos rewires the nervous system, how survival becomes identity, how independence can become armor, and how difficult it can be to believe that someone will stay once your entire life has taught you otherwise. One of the people who helped me understand that reality more deeply was Gabe Clark. We used portions of Gabe's story throughout Season 1, but there was more there, more honesty, more vulnerability, more insight into what it feels like to grow up carrying your life from house to house, learning to survive long before you ever learned to trust. So today, we're bringing you more of that conversation, because sometimes the deepest fractures are the ones that no one sees at first. Gabe, could you share, maybe just, I think the best place to start is just share us a little bit about your background, what you're willing to share related to how you ended up in the foster care system and what that journey was like for you.
So I entered the foster care system when I was in the 7th grade. So it was after my mom had passed away, and my dad ended up losing his parental rights, a year after that. So we moved in with him. But really, before that, we grew up in chaos. I mean, I moved around a ton. My parents were never married, and I spent most of my childhood, bouncing back and forth between my parents. My mom struggled with alcoholism and was super abusive, both, emotionally and physically. So even before foster care, right, I had pretty significant trauma. And I can remember growing, one of my most poignant memories is riding the bus home every day after school, and you would just have this sinking feeling in your stomach. Okay, what am I going to be walking into tonight? And the bus would pull up, and I can just vividly remember getting up, walking to the front of the bus, and waiting to see if I could hear music playing from the house. Because if mom was on a bender, she would normally crank the music up and would be cleaning or working or doing something. And so if you heard music playing, you did your best to sneak in through the side door, kind of slink up the stairs to your room, and just try to avoid the abuse for the night.
There's something devastating about hearing a child describe home that way, not as comfort, not as refuge, but as unpredictability, as emotional threat assessment, as survival. And for many young people who eventually enter foster care, the trauma doesn't begin with removal. It begins years earlier, in homes where children learn to scan rooms instead of resting in them, where they become emotionally vigilant long before anyone notices.
My mom had passed away in a car accident. So she was drunk driving, and we were staying with my dad at the time. And the police came to the door one Saturday morning and gave us the news. And if it helps paint a picture, right, of kind of how I felt at that time, I didn't cry. My first thought, unfortunately, and I can say this with a lot of forgiveness now, but at the time I was good riddance.
That line stopped me when Gabe said it. Not because it sounded cruel, but because it sounded like survival. There's a kind of numbness that trauma can create, especially in children. A point where grief no longer arrives as sadness, only relief. Not because the child lacks love, but because chaos has exhausted their capacity to mourn.
We then stayed with my dad, like I said, for about a year. But that wasn't really a good environment for us either. My dad sold marijuana and worked really long hours in construction. So even at a young age in Fort Wayne, Indiana, which I mean, it's not like Chicago or anything, right? But at 10 or 11, like I'm running the streets. I basically check in at lunchtime with my grandma or my dad, and then otherwise I'm just free to get into a bunch of tomfoolery, which I did. And so my dad ultimately ended up losing his parental rights, and then we got pulled from the home and stayed with family for just a little bit, and then ended up going into foster care.
One of the things that stood out to me during our conversation was how early Gabe learned independence. Not the healthy kind, not gradual maturity, but survival independence. The kind children develop when there's no one consistently available to help carry the weight.
I remember having to go to middle school, but my foster mom is like, I'm not going to take you. You're going to ride the bus. Like, I bought you bus passes. And so I've never ridden the city bus before. I have no idea like how these interchanges work. And I just like get up, get dressed, go wait at the bus stop, and then like figure it out. And, it's good. It's fine now. Like I look back and it's not that big of a deal. But when you're 12 or 13, like that's kind of a scary situation. Like you get dropped off in downtown Fort Wayne at this busy bus exchange, and you got to get through that and then make sure you get off at the right stop and that the timing all works out. And so there's just a lot of things like that you had to just like figure out.
That's the thing statistics rarely capture: the exhaustion of constant adaptation. New homes, new schools, new adults, new rules, over and over again. And eventually, survival becomes less like a temporary response and more like a personality.
You get shuttled around so much and you spend your whole life figuring out like the only person who's going to look out for me is me. Like I'm the only person who's been constant in my life. I'm the only person who has like put things over the finish line or like watched out for me or watched out for my family or accomplished the things.
That kind of hyper-independence is often praised in young people. We call it resilience, strength, maturity. But underneath it is often something much sadder: a child learning not to need anyone. Then we start talking about something that nearly every former foster youth I've interviewed eventually mentions: the trash bag. What is the significance of the trash bag in your life? Because I've heard it from several foster care kids as they've moved from home to home, this trash bag. What was that like for you, and what was the significance of that as in your experience of change through your childhood?
Yeah, so I want to be candid on the front end of this. Like I think I've got a memory of this because I can't remember how else we would have moved our material. Like I wasn't given like a bag or anything, like a duffel bag or anything from an agency that I can recall. But because I remember walking through the threshold of my first foster home and it just being like, and you've got everything you own in a bag, especially like with a trash bag. It's like, what does that communicate? I mean, one, I think it's like, hey, you're valuable. Like the things that you have, the things you're toting around with you, like are not really valuable. And I think it is a sign of like scarcity as well. Like everything you have literally can fit in this little, what are they now, like 14-gallon bag. And really just a sense of like instability. So it's like insignificance and instability. And some of this I think is my specific story of like moving around a ton, but like I seem to like always have memories in my childhood of like never really unpacking, because whether I was like moving in with my dad or I was like moving in with my mom, and even growing up with my mom, like we had a house fire and we rented for a period, and so we like bounced around a lot. I just like there was never a sense where it was like, oh, okay, I'm going to take the things, the abundance that I've been given, like through a family that's stable and that loves me, like I'm going to put these things in their place and they're going to stay here. it was always like, no, you got to keep them ready to move, and there's no point.
No point unpacking. Physically, emotionally, relationally. Eventually, instability stops feeling temporary. It becomes normal. You stop trusting permanence. You stop expecting people to stay. And maybe most painfully, you stop letting yourself fully belong anywhere.
Is there a level of intentionality that's like being missed, and just like in subtle communications that of how we tell these kids that they are loved and they are looked after, and like the things that they have, like even if they aren't plentiful and abundant, like they are important. And how do you really care for them well during one of the most like traumatic experiences of their life?
Eventually, Gabe was placed with foster parents named Dan and Martha Webb. And while he didn't know it at the time, that placement would change his life, but not immediately. Because by then, Gabe had already spent years building emotional armor. So what made that experience with them? Because you've mentioned them a couple of times. Like, what was that turning point as you were a part of their family?
I think for me, it was their persistence in love. And so I was with them. I moved in before my junior year of high school, and I was with them until I graduated. And the first year I was with them, I mean, it's almost like self-sabotage, I think, in some ways, right? It's like you're afraid to be vulnerable because you're like worried about that deep rejection that, oh, wow, like I am unlovable. And so you spend a lot of time like building a shell, and some of this is subconscious, right? But you spend a lot of time like building that shell and like keeping them at arm's length. And the way I would almost describe it is, again, I was like grateful for the home, but it's like, hey, I appreciate it. I'm going to go do my own thing. Peace. And anytime they tried to like assert authority over me or like create structure and rigor and actually like develop a young man, I really bucked against that because I wasn't interested.
That part feels important because often we talk about kids acting out in foster care. But what if some of that behavior isn't rebellion? What if it's fear? What if children aren't testing whether people love them, but how long they'll stay once they've been given a reason to leave?
And there was one conversation in particular, right, that I tell that, as far as I can remember, it was the day that my heart completely changed. I was in cross country. I was busy with a lot of sports, and I had just gotten done with a long run. And they lived out in the country, and so I was running the country roads, and I was coming up the hill, and Dan and Martha were sitting out on the back patio, and they said, hey, Gabe, like, why don't you come over here and sit down? We want to have a conversation. And I'm probably just like, oh my gosh, like here we go again, just expecting them, what did I do wrong?
You never know where it's going to go, yeah.
Yeah. And so I sit down, and I'm basically like, what? And we had a like particularly hard week that I recall. And Dan and Martha like just proceeded to tell me, rather than getting scolded, like how much they loved me. And Martha, she and I butted heads a ton, whatever. But like Martha proceeded to tell me like one of the reasons why she was so hard on me was because of the leadership potential that she saw in me. And they explained to me that like they saw that I set the tone in the house, and like the way that I acted was like my foster brothers, I had like 4 at the time, like they followed suit. And so they were really calling things out of me that I don't think I had heard in my life before. Maybe I had, or maybe I wasn't ready to receive them. But they told me that if I wanted it, they wanted to be my forever family. And I don't know what it was, but I can tell you, like, the next day, my rock hard heart was softened, and I at that point was like willing then to be vulnerable and to be open to love and being loved, and it really changed the course of my life.
That phrase stayed with me too. My rock hard heart softened. Not because healing suddenly became easy, but because someone had finally stayed long enough for trust to become possible. Gabe also talked about 2 counselors who helped reshape the way he understood the world, not through dramatic breakthroughs, but through small interruptions in the stories that trauma had taught him to tell himself.
You talked about like other relationships. I can think of like two other like men that really stood out for me. So Greg Hobson was one of my counselors, and Robert Johnson was another one. And I just felt like these guys really saw me. I wasn't just a kid passing through, but they legitimately cared about my success. And I think one of the biggest things they did is they challenged a ton of my assumptions about life and about the world. And so I remember like Greg Hobson would do this exercise where I would come in and like maybe I was in a bad mood or something, and he'd ask me why, and I would give him a story and I would give him like my perspective of the events. And he would say, "Is that really the way it happened? Or is that really what you thought that person was trying to do?" You know, to be like, "Yeah, like the teacher was out to get me." And he's like, "Well, what might be another scenario in where like the teacher may have done this?" And you said, "Okay, well maybe the teacher didn't see me raising my hand and that's why they didn't call on me." And he's like, "Good, like what's another? What's another?" And he would challenge my assumptions about the world. And Robert Johnson would do this a lot of times too. And I think it's so easy. Well, I think we all do this, but I can just remember at points in my life where I just would create this whole narrative in my head about all of the things that were happening to me. And those two were hugely instrumental, I think, in helping me identify that, well, like I wasn't necessarily the center of the world. Things weren't necessarily just happening to me. And I had agency and I could take responsibility for things.
Trauma has a way of teaching people that the world is unsafe, that rejection is inevitable, that conflict is personal, that abandonment is always coming. And healing sometimes begins with learning a radically different possibility, that maybe not everyone is leaving. Maybe not everyone is against you. Maybe safety is actually possible. Okay, so you're 18 years old, you found a family, you're transitioning out, like you're moving to the next level. How can you help us understand, did you get any preparation or guidance as you transitioned? What did that step look like for you? How did you make some of the choices you made so that you were set up for success?
Yeah, good question. I think mixed bag is the way I would describe that, because I think there was a level of excitement for the independence, which I think any normal teenager probably has a level of. But I would say like I had grown to a point of love and relationship with Dan and Martha that it was bittersweet for me to be leaving the house, and some nerves there. I think, you know, okay, I've been talking like a hot shot my whole life about how I was ready to like do this on my own, yada, and then it's like, okay, well, like put your chips on the table, let's go. But I had a ton of people around me that really were encouraging and invested in me. And the other thing that is like I was going to Purdue with two of my best friends from high school that I had developed a relationship with. So there was a level of like continuity there. I really wasn't going off like by myself. So mentioned I ran cross country. Two guys, Mark Winning and Josh Bales, they were best friends since they were infants, and really, again, just like, I think super gracious, right? I'm like going to try not to choke up here, but some random foster kid wanders in his junior year and just like invited me in, very open, and we like connected, and we ran cross country together, we ran track together, we spent our summers together, and we all went to Purdue together. And I think I would just chalk that up to like, again, like we talk about how relationships matter. That's another group of guys that, man, maybe my life could have been entirely different if I didn't have them as anchors when I first went to Purdue.
That may be the biggest myth we tell young people aging out of foster care, that adulthood is about independence. Because the truth is, none of us do this alone. Not really. Most of us have people quietly helping carry the weight long after childhood ends. People who help us navigate paperwork, review resumes, answer late-night phone calls, remind us that we matter when life falls apart. The difference is many of us call that normal, while foster youth are often expected to call it strength when they survive without it. Gabe Clark's story is ultimately not just about foster care. It's about what instability does to a child's understanding of love, permanence, and safety. And what can happen when someone stays long enough to slowly rewrite that story. Because resilience is real, but resilience alone is not healing. Healing often begins with something much quieter. A foster parent who persists, a counselor who sees you, a mentor who refuses to give up, a family who keeps showing up. Not perfectly, just consistently. If you've enjoyed Fracture to Flourish, we'd love for you to share this episode with someone else, because awareness matters. Stories matter. And maybe the most powerful thing that we can do is refuse to look away from each other. I'm Bryce Butler, and this is Fracture to Flourish.